Well, we've got two students, one who's a college student here at Millersville, third year. She'll introduce herself more, but this is...
Hey guys, I'm Abby. I'm a junior here, and my major is broadcaster.
And high school student.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a senior at Lancaster Country High School right now.
And she just spoke this morning as well. And my name is Kevin Ghaffari. I'm a high school teacher, taught 10 years back in New York, 15 years in Baltimore, Maryland area, and I just moved here in the last couple of years. So I'm a special ed teacher, social studies teacher, and English teacher, primarily middle and high school. And I think one thing all three of us, I'm learning disabled, I didn't read well in first and second grade. I asked my mom, are they going to continue doing this through high school, through school? And she says, yes, part of school. So I almost wanted to drop out at that age. My mom then got me into a summer program. I'm back from New York in the 1970s when, if you heard in the presentation, the whole language was being kind of introduced at that time, and that's for people who already can read almost when they come into the school system. I couldn't decode, I couldn't decipher what was going on. So it resulted in behavior issues and all the stuff in the 70s that schools couldn't deal with. Now we have all the laws that protect them. IDEA came in afterwards, and we have good teachers that are working with the students. What we're going to look at too is two different areas. One is the social emotional. Really, in working with disabilities, the first thing you need to deal with are all those emotional things that are going on. That precedes any cognitive process. You're not going to get to your schoolwork until you get through the emotions that are going on. Then the second part will be academic. So before we can get to the academic, we've got to get to these two areas, really. The anxiety that a student's coming home with, not sure that they can do the work they've been told to do, and then the adjustment emotional issues and trying to fit in with those kids who are in school, maybe doing better than they are. Better in these skills, but not better in everything, okay? So first and those are the expectations, what teachers are expecting of them, and then what resources they have, either given by the teacher or they need to come up with at home. So the resources where we'll get to that homework help. Okay? And first though, we got to start with the emotional. How does the student learn? How does the student approach the content that you're giving them in class? As teachers, we're trying to get to the prefrontal cortex, in cases of the language-specific things, the temporal lobe, and where you're processing all that language in your brain. But that's not where students are at. They're back here at the amygdala, which is kind of the lizard brain, or even more so just the emotional area. It's the filter, it's the thing that tells you what to do before you do what you should do. And sometimes it doesn't always tell you the right thing to do. So adolescents' minds are just filled with emotions, and the emotions are really what's motivating most of their behavior, rather than the good sense you expect. At that age, you've heard that, it's still developing. And the emotions, the UCal Berkeley professor described the emotions of a young person, adolescent to college. Hello. Sorry. How are you? Grab a seat, anyone? We're just going over how the brain processes information before it gets to the information. And this UCal Berkeley professor described an adolescent's emotions as being like being in love, for the first time, if you can put your minds here, adults, in Paris, after having 2 shots of espresso. So put that in your head, and that's about where an adolescent's mind is, before they even approach the information. Okay? Then add to that all of the adjustment that they're dealing with in school, and not living up to maybe their own expectations, maybe their parents, and certainly probably their teachers. Then they have anxiety, and they're not sure how to really deal with what's been given to them. Then they got to come home and deal with that all. So the teacher's job is that in between, teachers, parents, to help deal with all of this mess before they can even get to any kind of reasoning and understanding. So if you can do things to help ease that stress for them, they're going to be able to approach their homework far better. And then these are the areas that a teacher wants to stimulate. The other is the hippocampus, which is the memories, where they're able to store all that they've learned and understood. You see the memory is very close to the amygdala, and like all areas in the brain, they communicate with each other, but a lot of the memories that a student has associated with anxiety, embarrassment, frustration, both at home and in school, it jumps right between the amygdala and the memory. Things will come right back to them. That's the kind of minor trauma even some students may have from experiences they've had in school. So how do we get through this? Okay. Dealing with the anxiety. Okay, so you're coming home, you've got a lot of stress from the school day. Most parents, are also stressed from their day. And students frustrated with the work expectations. Maybe they weren't made clear by the teacher. Maybe they were made clear, but they need to be repeated, you know, and teachers don't always give that repetition that's necessary. And then there's the family and social expectations that are at home, and what other things you expect your child to do before they can begin doing their homework. Okay, and then adjustment in school. You know, they're disappointed with their own limitations. You know, they've been reminded either verbally by teachers. I mean, I teach special ed classes, but then I go into a lot of general ed classes. So I'll be with social studies and English teachers, and I see their expectations are very different from what I know a student needs to deal with. I can work with that teacher outside of the class, but the student doesn't always get that back from the teacher. If you're in public schools, usually your student has a case manager. That's the person. As we go into self-advocacy, you should really have your student connect with. The case manager is the one that will deal with all of the teacher issues that are going on and communicate with you as a parent. And then confusion about work demands too. Teachers, again, not making it clear what they're supposed to be doing. And then adjusting to lowering their expectations. That doesn't mean that they need to accept that they're not going to do well, but just adjusting those expectations. You know, teachers may have certain things for certain students, and they may be moving at a pace that the students can't keep up with. It's kind of parents' role when the student comes home to help ease that anxiety and help them understand that they're competing with themselves and not with other students, and set different signposts and different goals. Okay, then the academic issues, expectations. How then can you go in and speak to the teachers that students need to speak to? You know, we're going to talk about that in the second session more. But if you don't know what you're supposed to do when you come home and you're not comfortable speaking to your teacher, then parents can step in. I have had many parents who will email me as a case manager and ask me to keep track of different needs that a student has with each of the teachers. Also, sometimes parents can send emails to the teacher and just get on an email tree. We try and do that if the teachers are open to it. You know, a lot of times teachers may have resistance, but as a teacher, you know, I'm on the side of the student and the child, not the other teachers. As a case manager, I have to go around and work with those teachers. But you as parents, you know, if you come into your case manager and have them push on in a way, you can push on the teachers better than other case managers can. When they hear from a parent, they're more quick to act. Well, I jumped back. Okay, again, homework expectations. If you're a teacher here, what you send home for a student is not, for a general ed student, is not always what a special ed student may need. So you can have two sets of instructions. You can have a set of detailed, like resources that they can use or other sites that they can come and, or any resources through the school. A lot of high schools have study centers that students can go to. And then modifications and accommodations. If you've gone through the IEP process, if you've gotten those, like we mentioned, if you don't use them, you'll end up losing them. So a lot of times, I have a lot of students who will tell me they don't want the extra time. The extra time might mean they need to be taken out of class, or if they're in, you know, sometimes a accommodation might be a small class setting, so that they can be placed in another room. They may not be given extra time. They might be given reading, maybe have a scribe, all those different things. Take them, you know, use them as much as you can. If you don't use them, it's kind of noted by the teachers, and when College Board or other testing time comes, they won't be able to get those accommodations unless they use them. And if you feel that there's any accommodations or modifications that aren't, you know, being offered, you can go online and there's a long menu of different ones you can add. You can call a meeting anytime. I think, assuming if some of you are new to the process, you know, there are those yearly, twice yearly usually meetings in most schools where you can talk to the case manager, but it doesn't mean you can't call the case manager anytime and all the time. And modifications can be changed. They need to be changed in a meeting, and they can call, you can call also as a parent, you can call that meeting anytime. Resources, okay. Finding the right support materials. We're going to go into more of that later. I don't want to take a lot of time now. They're going to be speaking, but in the advocacy and in the strategies at the end, we'll have more detailed resources. Also, the next session we'll talk about allies and advocates. Find teachers in the school. If your teacher, you know, if you're in a single class and you're in elementary school and one teacher isn't offering as much as you feel the child should, then the next step up is speak to whoever the team leader or whoever does special ed in that school. If they aren't providing it for you, then you can even go to the district and speak to someone there. Then there are so many other outside advocates that you can call in who can either do added assessment in addition to what the school's doing. Any school has to give you assessment. If you request it, you know, they put a clock on it, or you should be aware they do. As soon as you ask it, they have a certain amount of time that they need to complete that paperwork in, and you can call back on that. The more you do, the more they know that you're kind of aware of that and that you'll be holding them accountable. It was a very deep legal process within the special ed law that they kind of don't want to tell you about. So we'll be talking later, you should really learn everything that's specific to Pennsylvania as well as national. And then the most important thing, if it's possible, it doesn't have to be your student's particular teacher, but again, that advocate or ally, find someone in the school. They can tell you the politics of whatever's going on. If there's issues and you don't feel your child's getting the services they need, you know, drop into the school. Honestly, if you're a parent too, I'll tell you, there are things that you think are going on that aren't going on. You know, they may have those goals that are set for your child, and they may be receiving certain services, but you know, they may not be the quality of services that you really need. And if you're aware of that, you can ask for things to be changed. I don't think any professional working in the field will mind you doing it if you do it in a way that makes them comfortable, and then if not, make them uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to stop there and bring up the two, and they'll give you more specific details about things they've done in high school and in college. Let's start with high school first. Okay, I'm going to pull up yours.
Alright, so I'm not gonna lie to you, homework's probably not my favorite part of the day. I made up a routine after the last few years, and it's really made doing homework a lot easier, and just being able to complete it and understand what's going on in the classroom. It's really, really necessary to limit distractions. It really defines how you're going to succeed in the classroom, because homework is preparing you for what's going to be going on the next day and throughout the week until you take your test. So really what you want to do is, before doing homework, is think ahead when preparing, it's very easy to get distracted by missing materials or electronic devices that you that are like across the room. I know if my laptop or my phone like anywhere in the vicinity, it's very easy for me to want to grab them, get distracted. And I find it easy or better to do homework kind of where other people, oh wait, this is starting in the middle of my presentation. Well, we'll go back. Near other people, I find it good to, no, I know how to do it. I like to do my homework kind of in the middle of the household, because I know if I start getting distracted, somebody can call me out on it. If I'm starting to play on my phone, somebody can be like, hey, aren't you supposed to be doing your AP Physics homework? And I'll be like, yes, I am. And I think that keeps me on track. But backtracking, first thing you need to do is you need to focus. Like I said before, complete focus is essential to doing homework. But I feel like you can't just focus on command. It's very hard. I don't know anyone who can just be like focused right in the moment. So you really have to prepare your environment first. And one thing is, you might want to just have a designated study area where you can just have everything in one place. You kind of have to know, as a student where you study best, and I think parents also have to know where their child is going to focus best. And that's the environment that they should be studying in. And if a child is getting easily distracted by the environment they're in, or they're not seeing results, or not performing at the level they know that they can be, it's good to change the environment that they are studying in. One thing to limit distractions, put electronics in a different room. Just don't have them near you. It's easy enough to get distracted, I think, for all of us on our phones. I know I've recently put a timer on my social media thinking that I didn't use it as much as I did. I've pretty much been reminded to get off my phone 3 times this week, and I was just like, I didn't think I was using it this much. Get all the materials before you sit down to do your homework. Either have that designated study area or just have like a bin where you have your study things. I know in my backpack I pretty much have everything I need to study with, and I can just take that to the kitchen table and sit down to study or at my desk. No music while reading. This is something that has been ingrained in my head for quite a while. At my school we have the Learning Lab for anyone with learning disabilities. They are very kind of strict on this. You do not get to listen to music while reading, and if you are doing your homework, you are not allowed to listen to music with lyrics. It's so easy to get distracted by the lyrics. I know I cannot do homework with any music with lyrics at all. Okay. Plan ahead. The I'll do it later thing is probably an excuse that we all give at some point as children. It's not a good excuse to do play video games. You have to make homework a priority. And you want to get a good night's sleep. A good night's sleep is really a key to being able to succeed in school, and it's so easy to want to do something until you know it's about time to go to sleep and then start your homework. You really have to be able to plan homework to be started just not right after school because you need a break, but definitely within 2 hours before you go to bed, because it's really not enough time, especially in high school. You're going to need, well, at least I need as a student, probably around 4 hours to do homework a night. That might sound like a lot, but sometimes it's even more. Remember to schedule breaks in between homework assignments. It's really overwhelming to try to do 4 hours of work at once. For elementary school, I would recommend that if they do 30 minutes of work, give them at least a 15-minute break. Elementary school, you really don't have that much homework. From what I remember, I think I had 15 minutes of homework, or reading a night, and then like some other homework assignments. I mean, it can be adjusted, but that's just kind of an outline. And for high school, probably 15 minutes for every hour of homework. I would suggest. This next one is really important. Do practice problems. It helps so much. In terms of how I study, I tend to print out any practice worksheets that my teachers will give me, and I will redo them, even if we've done them in class. I think we did my practice problems probably 2 or 3 times to study for my math final last year, and I was the top scorer in the class, and it just really helped to redo those, know the process, know what I got wrong, look at where I went wrong, and redo them. And it really, the repetition helps integrate it into your brain, knowing the process, and just being able to know that you know how to do it in the right way instead of just looking at it, knowing that you got it wrong, and seeing the solution. It really helps to be interactive with it. And it also allows you to get acquainted with different ways of doing the problem, different ways that problem could be worded, especially if you're looking for practice problems outside of what the teacher gives you. If you look online to find different ways, it's better to know the different formats that they can ask you. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it helps you find where you're going wrong in the problem, and allows you to kind of target where your weak spot is, which is really helpful, because then you can actually go to the teacher, ask them how to do it, if you know specifically in the problem where you are confused. Because if you go to your teacher and you just say, I don't understand, they're probably gonna try to like explain the whole thing to you, and you're like, no, I get that. And it's just gonna kind of be a mess in your brain. I know for me, it's very helpful to just target that one little piece where I'm getting mixed up. So that's, I think, what I have for you.
Hey guys, so like I said, I'm a junior here. A little bit about me. I got diagnosed around first grade. I went to public school for elementary school. We found that the methods that they were teaching me weren't really working. I ended up going to a private school that specialized in different kind of teaching methods for kids with disabilities. I went in barely knowing how to write my name, and I left on a 12th grade level 3 years later. So that's one of my proudest accomplishments. I just want to say before I start anything else, I see a lot of parents in the room, and that personally makes my heart really warm. I would not be where I am today if it weren't for my parents. I'm going to go through a little bit what it's like to do homework when you have dyslexia. And I know growing up, it's really hard. I would fight. It does. It does. It really does. I'm not going to lie to you. And are there times that you fight with your mom or your parents? Yeah. But it's hard, and you have to keep pushing, and sometimes there's always going to be that pushback there, but the best thing you can do is support your kid. I know a lot of other kids who had a lot of learning disabilities like I did, and they didn't have the support that I had, and I just kind of saw the public school district just totally really get rid of a lot of potential that they had. Like for instance, I have dyslexia, but I also have dysgraphia and dyscalculia as well, the big three. But I really like to read, and I've always really liked to read. And when I went back to public school for high school, I really wanted to be in AP classes for English. I had all the scores, but the administration wouldn't let me because I had a learning disability because I had an IEP. And it really took fighting. I think my drama teacher as well, because she was part of the AP department, AP English department, and she really got me there. But just like I remember my case manager, because math is probably my weakest area, I have awful issues with numbers. And he told me, he was like, I've never dealt with someone like this before, which is kind of horrific to think about. He was like, I've never had a student who was low in one area doing remedial stuff, but then being an AP in another. And I kind of think that speaks a lot to the school system, that they think if you're low, you're just low, which isn't necessarily true, because I find that a lot of people with learning disabilities, we might be lower in one area, but there can be another area that we totally succeed in. So here's just something. Cool. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the emotions that I know I personally felt growing up having dyslexia and trying to do my homework. So these are just some of them. I highlighted the ones that were really specific to me. I know usually you think, oh, like anxiety is one of them, but there's also a lot of shame in it. You try and do all this work, and then when you go in and you see, like, you think about all the time that you had to spend doing your homework, and then maybe a classmate will be like, oh yeah, it was easy, I got it done in 5 minutes. There's kind of like some shame in that. I know I have terrible handwriting. I got bullied a lot in elementary school for not having handwriting that was as good as the other kids. And that's where a lot of the inadequacy comes as well. It's just really hard because when you have dyslexia, you have to work 50 times harder than the kid next to you to be on the same level. And it takes so much determination, and it just takes so much practice. And being able to have that self-discipline is really important. And I put resentment as well, because you do kind of look at other kids and just, you don't understand how hard, like, you don't understand how it's not just hard for everybody else as it is for you. It's kind of something, like, one reason that's really hard when I was a kid is I didn't realize that I was that different. And even like going through college, like my mom would be like, no, your work can't look like this, it has to look like this. And I'd always get very mad at her, but now I understand that she just wanted my work to look like everybody else's. And it's kind of just something you start to understand as you grow up. There's also the lack of motivation. It can get really hard and really stressful. But just motivating your child, obviously letting them take breaks, like you said. Finding something that your kid's really passionate about will really help them. For instance, when I was a kid, I loved arts and crafts, and I still really do. So what my mom would do is she would be like, okay, we get this, this, and this done, and then we can make a craft together, and that was always really what would motivate me to get through that stuff. Hopelessness is also a big one as well. So like I said, just really encouraging your child and just really being there as an emotional support system is really important. So these are just some things, some tips I had for like educators and for teachers. So I know specifically for math, which was my weakest area, in high school, almost every morning I'd have to go see my math teacher and I'd need to work the problems out. And I find that one of the biggest things is that in teachers is just being patient. My math teacher in junior year of high school, I would always need to go in, and I also have short-term processing issues as well. So I would learn something, say at 8 o'clock, and then I would come into class 45 minutes later, and it would just be gone. It's kind of like the math and numbers part of my brain is a little bit like Dory from Finding Nemo. It's there and then it's gone. Yeah.
Right after class.
Yeah, it's just gone. You don't know where it goes. But I really found I had such issues with this. And I remember during an IEP meeting, my teacher told my parents that she thought I was faking my learning disability to get out of work. It was the worst thing. So that's why highlighted in gold, I have be empathetic, because that's the most important thing you can do, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent. Being empathetic towards what the kids are going through is just, it makes a world of difference. Some other tips are trying different ways of teaching. I know, like for me, visually stuff is kind of hard, but for some reason auditory, like I can remember things really well when it's heard. So when teachers kind of switch up that method, like I know some teachers do like hands-on approaches, which is kind of phased out more, I feel, when you get more into middle school and high school, which I think is a shame, because even though it seems like childish, some kids really benefit from, oh, if I put this together, like if I count these blocks, it goes over here, and I just feel like it's easier to learn that way. And then I think it's really important for parents and teachers to talk to their kids, because while you think, oh, like they have dyslexia, dyslexia is very different for everybody who's affected by it. So like, my dyslexia is different from somebody else's dyslexia. So it's very important to talk to your kid and kind of understand where they're struggling and what it's like for them, just because there's so much of a spectrum. And that's important too, because I feel like if you can target the root of the problem, you can really make a difference, because that's kind of how you know you can get at the problem. And then I have some tips for students as well. Scheduling time, which Paige talked about a little bit, is really important. And making sure you know what you need to get done. It really helps to know yourself, and this is kind of something that happens as you get older. Like figuring out if you're a day person or more of a night person and when you're most productive really helps. It also helps to set aside specific time just for homework. I know that this is, Paige talked about the issue with her phone. I have this app on my phone called Forest Grow. It's awesome. I don't know if anybody's used it before, but it's this app that you can get in the App Store. I think it costs like $2, where you set a timer and you have to leave your phone alone. And as it's, like as you don't touch your phone, something like grows like a tree. And like if you touch your phone, the tree dies. So it's like a good motivation. So say like, oh, I wanted to focus for like 20 minutes. You set your timer and you look, oh, cool, sunflowers grew. And then you got work done. So that's something that's really good.
What's it called, Forest Grow?
Forest Grow, yeah. It's awesome. A mental health checkup every once in a while, like just really taking stock of how, when you have dyslexia, how you feel emotionally is really important. It's important to talk to your child too about what they're feeling. Maybe sometimes sit down and be like, hey, how's school? I know you're probably anxious, but like, how else are you? Because as you saw, there's a lot of different emotions that can come, and there's a lot of self-esteem issues that can really arise from dyslexia and having a learning disability, just because it's really, like, it takes a toll and it's very emotionally draining. So being able to know how you're doing inside yourself and being able to check up on your kid and being like, hey, are you okay, makes a world of difference. I found being in college, to-do lists are everything. They're so important and they're so nice. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would always write down everything that I needed to do. Yeah, and I'd be like, oh, there's a list. But you know what I do when I wake up in the morning now? I write a list.
Yeah, I like crossing out. It's the most satisfying thing.
Isn't it fun? And then you'll be done for the day.
I'm done.
There's lots of different ways to do it. I know for me, handwriting really helps stick in my brain. Like I do like a Post-it note system. So like I have like a booklet. Fortunately, I didn't think to bring it with me. But I have like a big Post-it note, and then I'll do like a smaller Post-it note, and then I'll put like on the bigger Post-it note, like, oh, this is the order of things that's gonna happen today. Like, oh, I have class, and I have lunch, and I have time here. Maybe I can do this assignment. And then on top of that, I would put the smaller sticky note and write like, what are my goals for today? Like, what do I want to get done? And that really helps when you're in college as well, just because you have 5 different classes and they're all over the place. But there are also a lot of different methods. I know some people use their phone to keep track of things. That really helps too. Or even just like a basic like pen and paper, crossing things off, just to keep things organized. And then this is the biggest one, being honest with yourself when you have dyslexia. This is another thing that really comes with time and like maturity, because you will kind of realize like, oh, I have to work so much harder than everybody else. And I know in college for me, it's been like, oh, there are times where people are going out and having fun, but then I'm like, oh, if I don't clean my room, I won't do anything else. So I have to stay back and I have to make sure that's done. And it's just really about realizing and like coming to terms with, this is going to be hard for me, but I know that I have things that I need to do so I can be successful. And that's really a skill that my parents gave to me, which is so nice to have. So like when you think about your homework, you really have to think, how long is this realistically going to take me? You have to plot out that time. Or if you're doing a practice problem and you're like, oh, do I get this? You have to ask yourself if you do, and then you have to think, why don't I get this? And you have to kind of decide if you need help or not. Because if you just think, oh, I'm okay, you'll kind of get into a hole, and it's really hard to dig yourself out of. So that's basically all the slides that I have.
Thank you. And now, I want to point out to you is all 3 of us, learning disabled, had parents who were teachers. So I think without that, we wouldn't have had that advocate in our home. And I think that they have patience, or they should, and they have experience enough to just know when to pull back and know when to step in. You know, a lot of cases, the reason we became good self-advocates later on is because our parents backed off, you know, like didn't do everything for us, and let us kind of lead the way. Like if I would get frustrated, my mom wouldn't push in and, you know, expect me to do certain things. She knew when to back off also. I've seen Dr. Craven, Jill's mother's professor here. I've spent time at her house watching a movie, and Paige is nowhere to be seen. She's up in the room doing all of her work. And at this stage, too, she doesn't usually seek that much help, but when she does, she's coming to us rather than us going into them. You can set times and certain goal posts for the student, but don't crowd them too much. And then teach them whatever you're doing for them, model it for them, let them know how you're doing it so that then they can continue doing it as well. And we're going to be talking more about self-advocacy next. Any questions for them or for us? Any issues you had or frustrations, or anything you want to share, anything you've been through?
I just want to thank all three of you and Paige this morning as being a parent, and so thank you, because it's so hard to understand, and being a role model as well for our students is really cool. Thank you. Really appreciate all of you guys.
And parents, there's a high degree of inherited learning skills that parents have that their children may have inherited. So often I'll say either you understand your child because you went through it yourself, or you're to blame for it because you gave it to your child. So in some way, be there for them, and that's what all they're asking. So enjoy yourself in the next few minutes. There's no coffee or anything. I don't know if they're having refreshments in between.
I have one thing to add. This is not an accommodation that I get anymore, but at public school, I had the accommodation to get notes from my teacher. If you have that accommodation, I highly recommend it. It is super helpful, especially if you are not the best note taker. I have acquired the kind of thinking that I have to take notes on everything now that I'm in high school, and I wish that I wish that my school offered that accommodation still, because for me it is very hard to pick out of the information what is important and what is not, and that just kind of sheet of notes really helps, because it is going to highlight everything that is important that you should be learning in the text. And I remember having that for history in the 6th grade, and I remember that being a great resource. And now that I'm in high school, I'm in a classroom where I'm not getting that, and we have this big textbook. It's over 1,000 pages. My classmates have flip through it, and I'm like, oh wow. Thank goodness we don't have to read the whole textbook. But you have to read these chapters, and it's a lot of information all at once, and half the equations we don't use. So as I'm going through the unit, I'm trying to pick out which equations that are actually important that we're using in class. And even going back in the book and doing practice problems, I went to my teacher the other day and I said, I really don't understand how to do this problem. And he's like, well, yeah, we didn't go into this depth. And I was like, well, that would explain it. But it is really helpful to get those notes that just the teacher has specifically just picked out the information. So highly recommend if you do have that accommodation and your school does offer that accommodation. I know in some private schools, in my own school, they said that they don't do that. But I know at Township they do. So if there's any Township residents.
And yeah, again, ask for those accommodations. There's a menu that they can pull from in the IEP. It's just up to you to, they're going to ask for some documentation, some evidence. Sometimes there's really not any evidence that could absolutely require that. So it's got to be the way they interpret what they've got. But you can push and get as much as you can when they first write that IEP. The more that you have in that list, I want this, especially if you have a team leader who's more open to putting them in, then it's easier to have them pulled out later. It's harder to get them put in. And that's the first step. If it doesn't say notes, then they can say we don't have to provide the notes. But if you really feel they need it, they may be saying no to the notes because they don't want to have to provide the notes. But do what you can to try and get them. Teachers should have a case manager who can do outside note taking for you. Sometimes they can have a student in the class who's taking notes if it's that type of notes. Most teachers have PowerPoint they can print out nowadays, so that's the notes as well.
And another thing I know that we have at my school, ask if, when you schedule extra time, if you have it, if you have to use the whole time if you finish early. Because some kids will not want to schedule the extra time because they don't need the entire time. But there's really no risk in just scheduling it if you don't have to have it. So I know in my classes, I can be saying, hey, in case I need extra time, can I come in during this time? And then that's all set up in case I need it. So even if I only need 15 minutes of that time, I have it and it doesn't conflict with the teacher's schedule, and I don't have to worry about it. But it's definitely a good thing to ask if you do schedule that time, if you're required to take it. I know, especially on finals, that was a thing at my school, that kids were not scheduling their extra time because they didn't really need it. But all the learning disabilities specialists said, just schedule it. And then because they redid the design, you can just leave the classroom when you're done.
And if you need a reader, that's the other, like a scribe, a reader, those are the things, the notes, they take extra work. The extra time in a separate space, that's easy for schools to do. But if your child's, if you have in there that they have the test read to them, tell the students to just have them read it to them. I've done this with students for years, and I'll compare a student's test score. I'll do it for them usually, because kids will say, I don't want to go out with the reader, I don't want it read to me, I don't need it read to me. If I read it to them, get us data, get the baseline from that, and then have them take a test where it's not being read, and they'll see the difference. There's like this big difference. The intonation, the way we read it to them gives them a lot of clarity. Plus, sometimes if the teacher, if the case manager or the co-teacher or whatever didn't modify the test, there are some words like an English test and social studies test that the student does not have to, not content area words, but like just sophisticated words that the teacher chose to use in their test. That can be weeded out by a good reader also. Head out to any other meetings if you want. We're going to be doing self-advocacy.